To welcome all of you here on this beautiful day. I would like to remind you that it was raining and cold until Dolores came in the building, and now the sun is out and the sun is shining. So we're really in for a treat. I don't know whether that is a wizard or a witch or a fortune teller, but whatever it is, she can do it, I promise you. I'd like to remind you all to turn off your cell phones now. Don't wait till they go off and then you wonder where in the world I'll turn this thing off. But isn't it a tribute to a fantastic artist on a day like today that we have a full house? And I think it's a compliment to Dolores, and I'd like to remind everybody that she is our daughter. We adopted her last year. You all did. It's a formal adoption, but that does not mean you can count her on your income tax. So just later. But Dolores, it's a delight to have you, and we're going to give you all the time you want. If there's anyone who does something you don't like, send them out. The best storyteller in the world, Dolores Hydock.
Thank you, Dr. Ted. Well, thanks to Dr. Ted and Dr. Shirley and to Tracy and to Sarah and to the whole crew at this beautiful library, to the good folks of First Bank for putting this series together and for keeping me on the schedule. I really appreciate that. But mostly, I thank all of you for coming. What are you thinking being here? You should be at home where it's dry. But believe me, I just appreciate so much you coming out today for this story. The sun is starting to come out, and it was a kind of gray, gloomy day before, which was a perfect kind of day for this story, which is a very, 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 very different kind of story than I've ever told you before. And so I was telling Angie, right? Angela. I was telling her before, anything, if this is your first time and you've heard about any of the kind of stories I've ever told, that ain't going to be it. This is a different kind of story. First of all, it's a long story. It's going to be 1 o'clock or a little after before we get out of here. If you have to leave, you have to leave. But I really hope you can stay because an awful lot happens in the last 5 minutes. Secondly, there are parts of this story that are dark with monsters, human and not so human monsters. But hey, even though there is a Christmas tree now, 2 Christmas trees now in the lobby, it is still 2 days until Halloween. And Halloween is a time when there's all kinds of monsters roaming around. And it's a holiday and it's a story that's a reminder we have always lived in dark and dangerous times and have always had to contend with a variety of monsters and dark forces. So there's nothing new in that. And then finally, the thing I want to tell you about this story is that it is an old story. Some people say it's from the 1400s, but it's hard to be sure because back then people did not write the stories down and copyright them. They just told the stories and told them again and again, and somebody else heard them and they told them and told them again. Sometimes the stories were told by minstrels, those traveling troubadours who went castle to castle and village to village, telling stories and singing songs to the lords and ladies in those fine castles. Sometimes the stories were told by the servants of those castles, who at the end of a long, hard day of work were finally able to put their feet up and tell stories of heroes and adventures and great, great love. And that's what this story is. It's a story of heroes and adventures and great, great love. But it is not a story that the minstrels would have made up to entertain the royal folk upstairs. No, this is a true story. A story that the servants told. The servants. The ones who were there to see it all just as it happened. Now, on Sunday, we're all going to turn our physical clocks back 1 hour. But right now, I want to invite you to turn your internal clock back, not 1 hour, but 600 years. And come with me in your imaginations to the dark and mysterious world of Eglamore and Cristobel. If you travel along the rocky coast of the southernmost part of what is now called England, on one side you feel the mist rising up off the gray-green sea that crashes against the rocks as it struggles to come ashore. You travel along the sea on one side. On the other side, there are towns and villages, each with its church or grand cathedral. And in some of those churches, there's a dark corner of a side chapel where a single candle casts its light, sending shadows flickering across the face of a stone figure that lies there, resting on top of its own tomb, so peaceful, so quiet, you'd swear it was just asleep, and at any moment might wake up and say good morning to you. Now, it's not people like you or me that have these tombs. No, no. These tombs are for kings and queens and ladies and knights. They lie there, dressed in stone, wearing their stone armor, their stone crowns, their stone jewels. But no matter how powerful they once were, no matter how many servants or soldiers they commanded in life, in death, just like the rest of us, they lie there alone. But along that rocky coast, in a gray stone chapel, in a county that was once called Arsden, there is one tomb topped with two stone figures, a knight and a lady, their shoulders touching, their arms touching the hem of her stone skirt, overlapping the edge of his stone tunic, so close not even a drop of water could find its way between them. They lie there, never to be separated, not even by death, never to be parted from each other's love. Long years ago, that county of Arsden was ruled by Count Prindell, who inherited those lands from his father and his father's father before him. He became ruler of Arsden when his father died, and when he was only 20 years old, too young to know what it was to be a good ruler. He was not a good ruler, for he believed that his inheritance made him worthy not just of land, but of loyalty too. And so he was cruel to his servants, careless of the knights who defended his lands, thoughtless, greedy in taxing the peasants who tended his fields and cared for his cattle. He was not loved, not respected, only feared. Before Count Prindell became ruler of Arsden, his father had arranged for the young man, once he became ruler of Arsden, once that happened, then he was to marry a woman, a noble woman whose royal family ruled in Saint-Omer, a tiny kingdom on the opposite shore of that gray-green sea, a woman so beautiful and of such sweet nature, it was said that she could tame butterflies. They would come sit right on her finger. It's not easy to do. You can try it. Well, when Count Prindell became ruler of Arsden, he and the lady were married. And once they were married, it would seem that the lady could tame not just butterflies, but could tame the Count too. For with her by his side, Count Prindell was not quite so fierce, not quite so ruthless, not quite so cold. And there was great rejoicing when it was announced, not yet 1 full year from the wedding day, that there would be another celebration soon to welcome an heir to that castle and those lands. But the lady, the Count's own wife, was so beautiful and so sweet. The angels wanted her with them. At least that's the story that the minstrels told later on when they sang their songs about how those same angels that carried the child to earth took the beautiful mother back with them to heaven. Well, when this happened, the child born, the lady gone, the Count would not eat, would not sleep, would not speak, not even to his most trusted advisors. He would not so much as look at that child. A daughter with her mother's gray-green eyes, and skin, they say, as white as whalebone. The Count could not bear to see his lady's face reflected in that little one, and so he gave the child to the care of a nurse and wanted nothing to do with that child at all. When 3 months had passed like this, the Count gave orders that a tower was to be built, a gray stone tower, 50 feet into the sky with 6 sides, not round, not square, but 6 sides. And at the very top, an opening on every side, a long, thin window the size of a man. It did not take long for the tower to be built, for with the lady gone, the Count was back to his old ways, beating the servants who did not move fast enough, insisting that the workers move the stones without stopping to rest or to sleep. And when the tower was done, the Count climbed up the gray stone steps to a little room at the very top, and there he would stay days at a time, staring out those long, thin windows the size of a man. And often, at twilight, the servants below would see him step out through one of those windows, stand there on the edge of the ledge, holding his arms outstretched like a great black bird, as though daring the angel that had taken his wife to come and take him too. Then he would retreat back into the tower, and there he would stay all alone in his terrible grief. Well, as time went by, the Count spent more and more of his time up in that tower, for from up there he could see everything that happened in and around his castle. He could see who was arriving by land or by sea. He could see which of his servants slept by the woodpile, could see which of his peasants had crops doing well and which fields were fallow, could see which of his noble guests crisscrossed the courtyard in the middle of the night, who slipped out of one bedchamber into another at the first light of day. And so it was that he knew all, and used his knowledge cruelly to beat the servant who slept in the day, to tax the peasant whose crops had done well, to blackmail the guest with the wandering eye. Did I mention that the Count was not loved? Years went by, and one day from up in that tower, the Count saw a child playing in the garden. He watched her run and laugh, and he looked at that child not with love. Oh, no, he would never be so foolish as to love anyone ever again. No. He looked at that child with a greedy heart, and he thought, that child is mine. She belongs to me. I will never again allow anything that is mine to be taken from me. He went down to the garden, insisted the child come to him. She did so, shyly, terrified of this strange man with the fierce eyes who did not smile, did not speak, only looked at her a long time, and then told the nurse that from then on, the child was to take her meals in the castle with him. And so the years went by. The girl was called Cristobel, a name that means clear, bright, beautiful one. And she grew into the very image of her mother in beauty and kindness and wisdom as well, for she learned quickly when she saw how her father treated his subjects, when she might intercede on their behalf and when she must keep still. Well, as you can imagine, men, young men, old men, wealthy men, lords, nobles, knights came from everywhere, seeking the hand of this golden-haired beauty. For Count Prendel had not remarried. Count Prendel had no other children. Count Prendel had no sons. And so the lucky man who married Cristobel would win not only the lifelong pleasure of having her by his side, but in time he would become ruler of all those lands as well. But when the suitors arrived, Count Prendel laughed at them. You want to be with my daughter forever? Well, you shall be, with your body cold in the ground under her feet. And he meant it too. And every one of those suitors suddenly decided maybe he wasn't the marrying type after all. And they all rode out of the county as fast as they could, grateful to leave with the breath still in them. So this was life in Arsden. The servants living in fear of their lives, the peasants having nothing to eat but dirt stew. Yes, really, that's what they ate, dirt stew, roots and grain mixed with a little water. I don't think I'd recommend it. And Count Prindell up in his tower, watching and plotting, and often at twilight slipping out through one of those long, thin windows the size of a man, standing there on the very edge of the ledge, arms outstretched, daring that angel of death to come get him, for he did not fear even that dark spirit. One day when she was about 14 years old, her father was off away somewhere, and Cristobel, that golden-haired beauty, climbed up the gray stone steps to the little room at the very top of the tower. It was the first time she'd ever been there. And once there, she stepped out through one of those long, thin windows the size of a man. She stood there on the edge of the ledge, holding her arms outstretched as she'd seen her father do so many times. And she thought, oh, how sweet it would be to fly away, to leave this sad and terrible life and feel her mother's arms wrapped around her in a loving embrace such as she had not known in all her young life. But then she looked out across that gray-green sea, across to the tiny kingdom of Saint-Omer, her mother's home, that little kingdom on the opposite shore. And she prayed, surely there is a better way to live this life. Mother, help me find it. She went back inside, went down the stone steps, and did not return to that cold, gray place again. As the years went on, Count Prindell acquired more and more lands and property and the power that came with it, all of it acquired and protected by his circle of knights who fought for him not out of love or loyalty, but because he paid them well. They were soldiers for hire, these wandering knights. And the countryside was full of men like these, mostly the younger sons of noble families whose title and property had gone to the oldest son, leaving nothing at all for the younger ones. And so here they were, men of noble birth, taught to ride and run and wrestle and joust, but no title, no property, still strong, brave, willing to fight for someone else's land, someone else's honor, as long as they had a roof over their head from time to time, now and then something nice to eat or drink. They would roam about, these soldiers for hire, collecting a few coins along the way by fighting in jousts and tournaments and games, providing entertainment for those boring times when the lords and nobles were at peace. And along the way, they might encounter some congenial castle, might catch the eye of some wealthy noble who needed their skills. They'd stay a while till some new adventure called them away. And it was knights like these soldiers for hire, who served Count Prindell. And whenever they were all there at the castle, they would take their meals together at a long table in the great hall. All the knights there with Count Prindell and his daughter Cristobel, who sat there at the table side by side, silent the whole time. One day, a wandering knight wandered up to the castle looking for work. He presented himself to Count Prindell, said, "My name is Eglamore, but adventure is what they call me. That is what I seek. I offer myself and my sword to your service if you need a soldier who fears no one nor wishes anyone harm." Eglamore. Eglamore. The Count had heard that name before. He had heard of this fearless knight who, though humble and unassuming in manner, had no equal on the battlefield, had never been bested in any tournament, had never lost a single joust or fight or battle of any kind. Oh, the Count could use a man like that. Well, who couldn't? Eglamore was welcomed into that circle of knights, soon proved himself as strong and brave as all the stories said he was. Count Prindell began to rely on the skills of Eglamore, began to depend on Eglamore to win him more riches and property. But while the Count was dreaming of lands to be won, Eglamore was dreaming of winning a better prize. For Eglamore had allowed himself to begin to dream of winning the hand of Cristobel. that golden-haired beauty who warmed that cold castle with her smile. Eglamore was no smooth-cheeked boy, no dreamy romantic from a minstrel story. No. He was a man of the world. He'd had an adventure of the heart or two. But the moment he saw Cristobel, saw those gray-green eyes as deep and mysterious as the sea, he felt himself drawn to her. And then as he watched her day after day, using her small powers to right the wrongs done by her father, he began to think, surely she is stronger and braver than I am to live such a life without complaint. Well, got to where he was so moony-eyed and love-struck over her, he couldn't even bear to be near her. Just the sound of her foot on the stair, her voice in the garden, made his heart skip a beat, made the breath catch in his throat. Oh, it got to where he couldn't even bear to be at the same table with her. And so there they were one night, all the knights and squires gathered at the long table in the great hall there with the Count Cristobel, all gathered there together, all except one. "Where's Eglamore?" said the Count. And Eglamore's squire, who knew the truth. The servants always know what's really going on. The squire said, "My lord, he is ill. He begs your forgiveness. He cannot be here." Ill? He cannot be ill. We have a tournament tomorrow. We are counting on him to win it for us. Cristobel, go to Eglamore's chamber and see what medicine might make him well. Cristobel could not believe her father's command. Clearly, her father had not begun to guess her secret. Her father clearly did not notice how her hand shook whenever Eglamore entered the room, did not see how her face went pale, then pink, then pale again whenever Eglamore looked at her. She left on her plate a dinner she could no longer eat, and taking 2 of her ladies' maids with her, as a proper young lady would do, she went to Eglamore's chamber. Now, Eglamore, all this time, had tried to stay away from her. He had kept away from the castle as long as he could. He had heard those stories of what happened to those other men who dared think themselves worthy of her, but he did not stay away from her because he was afraid of her father. He had stayed away because he was afraid that she would think him a fool. Here he was, no money, no property, no title, nothing to offer her except a heart that wanted only to make her happy. How dare he imagine that was enough? But now, here she was, entering his room. She found him standing at the window, staring out at the moon and the stars. Oh, that's how pathetic and lovesick he was. Oh, it was all quite picturesque, but the truth is, moments before, he'd been mooning about, lying face down across his bed, until his squire rushed up to warn him that the lady herself was on her way. And I don't mind telling you, love-struck as he was, he still managed to get up, wash his face, put on a fresh shirt, and arrange himself in front of the window. She entered his room, this golden-haired beauty, and said, "My father sent me to ask after your health. Are you ill?" Here she was, standing right there next to him. He swallowed his heart that had somehow floated up to the middle of his throat. And he said, "If you ask only on your father's behalf, tell him it is only old wounds from long ago battles that trouble me. And if I ask not for my father, but for myself, then I would tell you that I suffer from new wounds, from a battle I cannot win, the battle to keep my heart from hoping that one day you might love me and be my wife." Let's just say those 2 ladies' maids made themselves busy in another part of the room while Eglamore and Cristobel got to know each other a little better. I know, things happen fast in these stories, but life was short. You know, if you knew what you wanted and didn't want, there was no point in being coy. She loved him, he loved her, just one small problem, her father. The next day, the day of the tournament, dawn bright and clear, and knights from all over, these soldiers from higher, came to compete. But the knight who won it all was Eglamore, who fought with a strength and spirit such as no one had ever seen before. As they headed back to the castle, Eglamore rode up next to the Count, said, "I have a question to ask you. The Count was afraid this was the moment he had hoped would not come, the moment when Eglamore announced he was leaving Arsden in search of some new adventure. Hoping that flattery might keep him there, he said, "Yes, of course. Ask your question. You are my most valiant and most valued knight. You know you may ask me anything you like. I'm glad you say I have served you well, but my question is not about my service. My question is about your daughter." "My daughter, yes. When is she to be married?" "Never. She is the most precious jewel I own. No man on earth is worthy of her, not even me. You, yes, me. I've served you well, you say so yourself. I've proven myself to be noble and true. No man could love her better than I. Will you entrust her to me? Make her my wife?" The old ones who first told this story said that at that moment, the birds stopped singing, the leaves stopped shivering in the trees. There was only the sound of the clip, clop of the horses' hooves on the dirt road leading back to the castle. A hot coal of anger burned in the Count's heart. How dare this man, this upstart of a man, how dare he imagine he could take his place as ruler of Cristobel and all those lands? But the Count knew how fearless and skillful Eglamore was. He didn't want this man as an enemy. He just wanted him dead. So his face showed a smile. "Yes, I know well your courage and valor, and I welcome you as my son and heir. But you must prove yourself worthy of my daughter in the eyes of others by completing 3 tasks. Do these 3 tasks, and you shall marry Cristobel and become ruler of Arsden when my time is done. Your first task is this. Off to the west, there is a forest full of shadows and cypress trees, and among those trees is a herd of deer. Bring me the head of one of those deer as your first task. And the other 2, I'll tell you the others when you return from the first." Now here we are, back at the castle. Let's enjoy our meal and celebrate our victory on the field. And the Count rode away. Kill a deer? That's all he had to do? He'd been doing that since he was 8 years old. That was no challenge to prove his worth, but if that's what the Count wanted, that's what he would do. And that evening, when he saw Cristobel crisscrossing the courtyard on her way to the great hall, he told her the good news. "Your father has agreed we can be married, only 3 tasks, and we shall be together." They kissed there in the shadows of the courtyard, unaware of a dark figure standing in the tower, watching them speak, watching them touch, watching them kiss. Nor did they know, as Count Prindel did, that the forest where Eglamore was to go was ruled by a giant who would make short work of anyone who dared enter that forest, much less tried to kill one of those deer. The next morning, Eglamore left the castle with Cristobel's kiss sweet on his lips. He traveled 4 days and 4 nights till he came to that that forest full of shadows and cypress trees. As he entered in among those trees, a herd of deer rose up around him, larger than any deer he'd ever seen before. He sounded a note on his hunting horn, the custom in those days to signal he was taking fair game. Fair game is what he thought this was. The sound of the horn awakened the giant from his rest. Now, this was no ordinary giant. This was no fairy tale giant, easy to outrun and outwit. No. This was an ogre, 3 times larger than any ordinary man. Maroc was his name. And villagers for miles around were his victims and his playthings. Children, chickens, cattle, none were safe when Maroc was bored or angry. And he was often angry. He was angry now as he headed into the heart of the forest. "Whatever fool is meddling with my deer will find it the most expensive meat he's ever bought, for he will pay for it with his life." By then, Eglamore had killed a deer, cut off a head to take back to the Count. He was just about to remount his horse when right in front of him, a pair of cypress trees flew apart and Maroc appeared, wielding in his hand a club the size of an oak. Eglamore did not have time to think, to breathe. He drew his sword, and from behind the tree, a shaft of sunlight struck the polished blade of the sword. It blinded the giant for just a moment, but in that moment, no bigger than a breath, Eglamore saw his chance. He hurled the sword. It found its mark and pierced the black heart of the giant, who crashed to the ground like a fallen tree, roared and shook, and then was still. Eglamore's heart once again started beating. He sat down on the ground to breathe and to think. Kill a deer in that forest. The Count would have known whose forest it was. The Count would have known the fate that awaited him there. So the Count wanted the head of a deer to prove his worth. He'd go one better. He got up, walked the length of the giant to measure him off, 15 feet from toe to top, reached across, shut the giant's staring eyes. Then with his sword, he cut off the giant's grisly head. Oh, the things we do for love, huh? And he did do it for love. He did it to prove he was not afraid of the Count or of anyone who would try to keep him from his one true love. From up in the tower, Count Prindel could not believe his eyes. Eglamore was returning. He had survived the giant. Oh well, there were dangers of all shapes and sizes. The Count welcomed Eglamore back. Oh, did a bit of acting worthy of any traveling minstrel, pretending he was so happy to have Eglamore home and to have the giant's bloody head lying there making a mess on the castle floor. Well done, well done. Now your second task is this. Off to the east is the kingdom of Shalgrave. All who live there live in dread fear of a terrible beast that roams wild and kills anyone it sees, wounds them with tusks 3 feet long, curved like scythes, sharp as swords, poisoned with venom, so that anyone touched by those tusks cannot live. Bring me the head of that beast as your second task. Well, once again, the Count knew of dangers. Eglamore did not. For the Count knew that that creature, though fearsome, would be no match for a man of Eglamore's skill. But the Count knew that that kingdom of Shalgrave was ruled by an elderly king who had no sons, one daughter, and property and riches far greater than anything Count Prindel could claim. In killing that beast, Eglamore would be a great hero, and surely the king of Shalgrave would offer Eglamore his daughter's hand in marriage and the kingdom as reward. And just as surely, Eglamore would choose to accept this great riches and power and forget all about Cristobel and the small holdings of Arsden that would not be his for a very long time. Well, Eglamore traveled 7 days and 7 nights till he came to the kingdom of Shalgrave. It went pretty much the way you would expect it to go. He dispatched the beast, no trouble at all, the people exclaiming how they had been saved, and the king of Shalgrave welcoming Eglamore into his castle, where for 3 months he was fed and fussed over, all the pretty girls of the palace smiling and winking and blinking their eyes at him. But Eglamore only had eyes for Cristobel. Just as the Count had predicted, the king of Shalgrave offered Eglamore his daughter's hand in marriage and the kingdom as reward. And Eglamore simply thanked the king for his generous offer, praised the daughter's great beauty and charm, but confessed that his heart belonged to another, and he must return to her. The king of Shalgrave gave Eglamore a ring, a golden ring with a blood-red stone. If you will accept no other token of our gratitude, at least accept this ring in honor of your courage and steadfastness on our behalf. Godspeed. Eglamore had been gone 4 months. The Count was pretty sure he wasn't ever coming back. So imagine his surprise when from up in the tower, he saw Eglamore riding home. Well, once again, the Count was forced to join in the welcome, smiling as broadly as anyone there. And that evening, when Eglamore and Cristobel had a moment alone together, he said to her, "My lady, do not ever doubt my love. I have traveled far, done hand-to-hand combat with a terrible beast. I turned down a kingdom, a fortune, and a beautiful woman just to be with you again." Do they make them like that anymore? I don't. Well, the next day, the Count reminded Eglamore he still had one more task to complete. And Eglamore, though eager to have these challenges done, asked if he might be allowed to stay at the castle and rest, regain his strength before continuing on. And the Count agreed Eglamore could stay for 12 weeks, and then he must complete the third task. Well, those 12 weeks were the best of Eglamore's life. He spent his days riding and hunting. He spent his evenings with Cristobel, walking in the garden within sight of her ladies' maids, the two of them talking about how life would be so different once they were married and ruled there together. But also, during that 12-week time, the two of them would slip away to a secret place deep in the woods where they could be alone. The night before Eglamore was to leave the castle for the third time, there in their secret meeting place, Eglamore gave Cristobel the ring, the golden ring with the blood-red stone that the king of Shalgrave had given him. Wear this great ring as a token of my love, never ending like the circle of the ring and as deep and true as the red of the stone. In the eyes of God, we are husband and wife, and I will return to you very soon. He was right about one of those things. According to common law in those days, their promise to each other, their consummation of their love, and the gift of the ring created a valid marriage by common law. These unions were not popular with brides' fathers, you understand. But it was a valid marriage by law. And so when Eglamore told Cristobel they were husband and wife, he was quite right. But when he told her he would return to her soon, he was sadly very wrong. The next morning, Eglamore left the castle to complete his third task. And the third task the Count had given him was to kill a dragon that roamed in Rexton, a county 200 miles to the north, a creature so vile, so evil, so fierce, no one dared go within miles of it. This time, Count Prindell knew of no secret dangers, no secret temptations of beauty or wealth. This time, the Count simply hoped that the dragon would kill Eglamore, and he hoped it would be a gruesome death. Eglamore traveled 20 days and 20 nights till he came to the place where the dragon lived. It was easy to recognize the place. You could see the bodies of knights scattered on the hills. You could see swords and shields, tarnished, rusted, gone green with age. The dragon was waiting for him, 30 feet long, green as glass, hard as stone, eyes red as fire. The dragon charged at Eglamore, struck him with a powerful blow that swatted him 20 feet into the air as if he were nothing but a child's toy. Then the dragon spat a crackling ball of fire straight at Eglamore, who fended off the flames with his shield. Then with his sword, Eglamore somehow cut off the dragon's tail, but the dragon took that bloody stump and pounded Eglamore with its weight. Then with its terrible jaws, it lifted Eglamore up into the air, slammed him to the ground again, up to the air, again to the ground. Eglamore, with his last bit of strength and a mad cry, swung blindly with his sword that somehow split the dragon's head in two. The creature shrieked, then shuddered, then staggered, then fell. Eglamore lay there in a river of blood, arms and legs bending in ways arms and legs do not usually bend. It was half a day later before two of the squires who served the baron there in Rexton found what was left of the dragon, and the night they picked up the man's burned, broken body, began to carry it to a place where it could be buried. When one of them felt a faint pulse, the other felt a faint breath, and so instead they took the man to the castle of the Baron of Rexton, where, with potions and herbs and loving care, the Baron's own doctors struggled to save him, but the wounds were many and deep and slow to heal, and for months Eglamore lay there trapped between life and death. Often, delirious in his sleep, he would scream out, "The County of Arsden!" He would scream out, "Crown Prindell!" And then he would add, "The dragon is dead. I kept my promise. Where is my prize?" Well, the Baron had no idea what this outcry meant. But after hearing it over and over and over again, he sent a courier to the county of Arsden with a message for Count Prindell. And the message was that the dragon was dead, and the night nearly so, and only God could say whether the man might live or die. The courier traveled to Arsden, climbed the gray stone steps of the tower to the little room at the top where he found Count Prindell, delivered the message. Then the courier turned and went back down those stone steps, and on his way down, he passed Cristobel climbing up. It was only the second time she had ever been to that room at the top of the tower, and once there, she confessed to her father a secret she could no longer conceal by binding herself tightly with linen cloths, by pretending she was sick when she couldn't eat. The truth is, she was carrying Eglamore's child. Her father did not care to hear how they were married in the eyes of the law. They were not married in his eyes. And since she had proven herself so foolish and false, she must not be any child of his. She must be an impostor, switched as an infant by the nurse. And she and her bastard child had no place in his castle, not any welcome at all at his table. Besides, he said, your husband, your Eglamore, is dead, killed by his own stupid ambition. Now go away. You can stay until the child is born. After that, I do not care what becomes of you. I never want to see your face again. Cristobel stayed there in her rooms in the castle. And when her time came, she gave birth to a boy with gray-green eyes and skin, they say, as white as whalebone. When the child was only 1 month old, she wrapped the child in a scarlet cloak, took the ring Eglamore had given her, the golden ring with the blood-red stone. She slipped the ring onto a slender ribbon that she tied around the child's neck so that if somehow they were separated on their journey, anyone finding the child would know he was born of noble blood. Then, telling only her most trusted maid about her plan, she carried the child down to the edge of that gray-green sea, climbed into a little boat that had washed ashore, a boat with no rudder and no sail, and set off for the tiny kingdom of Saint-Omer, her mother's home on the opposite shore. Only one person saw them go. A dark figure standing in the tower, watching them disappear in the morning mist. It took 6 days. 6 cold, stormy days until they washed up onto a rocky beach inhabited only by a flock of great black birds that swooped about, shrieking into the wind. Cristobel had no idea where she was. She hid the child in a secluded place while she went to look for wood and water. She'd only been gone a little while when she heard the child cry out. She ran back to see the child being carried off, the corners of the scarlet cloak clutched in the claws of a great black bird. She screamed at the bird, but the child was gone. She fell to her knees and rocked back and forth, back and forth. The great black bird that had taken the child carried it to a distant land, the kingdom of Ongberg. He set his scarlet package down in a field while the bird flew away to look for food and water. A squire hunting nearby found this strange cargo, went to see what this was about. But when that squire found the scarlet cloak of fine cloth, saw the golden ring with the blood-red stone, he thought, oh, this is no magical child born of birds. This is a child of noble blood. And he took the child to the king of Ongberg. The king, in his turn, showed the child to the queen. Wife, he said, long have we prayed that God would bless us with the child, and God has not seen fit to grant that prayer until now. But now, look, God has sent us this beautiful boy. The king and queen of Ongberg welcomed that child as if he were their very own. They named him Degrabel, a name that means lost, beautiful child. And they had made for him a special coat of arms on a field of blue, a great black bird clutching in its claws an infant wrapped in a scarlet cloak. And from the time the child was old enough that it would stay on his hand, he wore always the golden ring with the blood-red stone, never knowing where it came from or what it meant. The child grew to be strong and brave, and when he was 15 years old, he was made prince and knight and heir to Ongberg. And if they knew this is how they would turn out, all parents would wish their babies borne away by great black birds. But while that child was first being welcomed into the kingdom of Ongberg, his mother was still wandering lost on that rocky shore. She wandered there for 2 days until she made her way to the castle of the place and begged to be presented to the king. And when the king saw her, he could tell, despite her ragged clothes and wild hair, he could tell this was a lady of gentle birth. And when he heard her story, he said to her, truly it is your mother's spirit that brought you here. I am your uncle, your mother's brother, and I welcome you to Saint-Omer, to the home and the family that have always been yours. And so, like her child a kingdom away, Cristobel was welcomed as a gift from God, and she slept that night as she had not slept in a very long time. 2 years went by. Cristobel still there at the home of her uncle, where she was loved and cared for, and she was grateful and pleasant and smiled when she could, but she was not happy. How could she be happy? When life had proven her father a wicked man, her child was lost to who knows where, and her husband, her Eglamore, her one true love, was gone forever. And she would never again see his face, never again feel the touch of his hand, never again rest her head on his shoulder, lie there side by side as they did before. There was no way for Cristobel to know that at that very moment, Eglamore was thinking those same things, thinking of the touch of her hand, the softness of her skin, the moment he would once again hold her in his arms, for he was not dead, but alive, and finally healed of the wounds inflicted by the dragon. He had been there at the home of the Baron of Rexton for 2 years, and he was eager to return to Cristobel to celebrate their wedding day. He thanked the Baron for all his kindness to him, remembered, even after all that time, to take with him what was left of the head of the dragon to give to the Count. And then, as fast as his horse could carry him, he headed back to Arsden. Some of the servants saw him approach, knew why he was there, knew what had happened. Oh, the servants always know what's going on. One of them ran up to him and said, "Sire, Cristobel is gone. She is dead. Her father banished her and her child. Yes, a child, a beautiful boy. He sent them to their deaths on the sea. She is lost forever." Eglamore did not stop for tears, but rode straight to the castle, walked into the great hall where Count Prendel was gathered with all his friends, lords, barons. Eglamore tossed the head of the dragon onto the floor and said, "This belongs to you. I kept my promise. You have broken yours. At your command, I killed 3 horrible monsters, but all their wickedness combined does not begin to equal the evil of the one who rules in this place. May God forgive you your cruelty and greed." Count Prendel looked around for his guards. What if Eglamore should try to take the castle by force? But Eglamore didn't want castles. What Eglamore wanted was lost to him forever. He left Arsden, and like so many other knights in those days, soldiers for hire. He joined the Crusades, went to the Holy Land, fought there for 15 years. And when the Crusades were done, there was more than a little gray in his once black beard. He felt in his bones the chill of the winter's night and the loneliness of his solitary life. He traveled slowly back, crossing a continent of countries on his way back home, wherever, whatever home was now. And like all those other soldiers for hire, along the way, he would fight in jousts and tournaments and games just to have something to do. In those 15 years that he'd been on crusade, Cristobel too passed 15 years there at the home of her uncle. There was silver now in her golden hair, and her gray-green eyes, once bright with hope, now shone with a compassion that comes from great loss. Her uncle, the king of Saint-Omer, was a powerful man with a strong army at his command, but her uncle was also advanced in years and weary of battle and the death and destruction it left in its wake. There was a neighboring king with whom he wanted a treaty. This neighboring king was also advanced in years. This neighboring king was also weary of battle. This neighboring king's wife had died some years ago. He had only one son ready to take over as his heir, and that king also wanted a treaty gained not by battles and a show of force, but a treaty gained through a diplomatic marriage, the joining of two royal families for the peaceful division of property and power. Love, it was understood by everyone. Love had nothing to do with this marriage at all. And the chosen bride was Cristobel, who was her uncle's only heir, who was glad to have some way to show her gratitude for all her uncle had done for her, and who had no love to give some new husband anyway. And so it was agreed Cristobel would marry the only son of this neighboring king. Now, the groom-to-be was a young man, as yet not tried in battle, but in jousts and tournaments, he had no equal, for he was clever and quick, and like many men of his young age, most impressed with his own skill. And so it was agreed that the neighboring king and his son would travel to the kingdom of Saint-Omer to meet the bride, to sign the treaties, to celebrate the wedding day. Great festivities planned, of course. The evening they'd arrive, there would be a huge feast in the great hall. And then the next day, the wedding itself. After that, a festival with food and music and games and jousts to entertain all the guests that had traveled so far to come to this royal wedding. So, the neighboring king and his son arrived in Saint-Omer, great feast there in the great hall. And when the food was done and the toasts were made, Cristobel and her young groom walked to the center of the hall to meet each other for the very first time. As Cristobel approached her groom, she looked up and saw on his tunic his coat of arms. On a field of blue, a great black bird clutching in its claws an infant wrapped in a scarlet cloak. Her face went pale, her knees went weak. The young man reached out to catch her arm. "My lady," he said, "you seem to faint." She looked down at the hand that steadied her and saw the golden ring with the blood-red stone. Well, it soon became quite clear there would be no marriage the next day. I'd say that was a bit of a close call, wouldn't you? But they all agreed there was still plenty to celebrate. I mean, the mother and son reunited, the royal families joined together. Besides, the castle was clean, the food cooked, the minstrels hired, everyone had traveled so far to come to the wedding. They might as well at least have the festival with the food and the music and the jousts and the games, and the knights from all over come to compete for prizes and bragging rights. And young Eglamore, the lost beautiful child, the groom who got out just in time and who fancied himself such a fabulous knight, he would take part in the games as well. So the next day, the sun shone, the breeze blew, the banners that lined the stands where everyone gathered to watch the games. And Eglamore, too full of himself for my taste, but I have to admit he was pretty good. He won every one of his matches. He went through the field as quick and smooth as a minstrel's trained monkey jumps through a hoop. Finally, there was just one more night left for him to fight. One night sitting there on his horse at the edge of the field, and Cristobel, oh, full of himself, calls out, "You there! You ready to fight?" A voice comes back. "I don't know that I want to fight you." "Oh, afraid of me, are you? That just shows you're a wise man." "No, it shows that I'm kinder than I should be. The other knights know the danger they face when they fight me, but you're just a boy. I don't want to hurt you." "Hurt me? Hurt me? I challenge you, sir. I'll have no mercy on your old bones." And of course, that's how it happened, that Eglamore rode against his own son that day, with Cristobel watching from the stands. The two knights charged at each other, experience and skill against the brashness of youth. Eglamore, barely lifting his arm, gave the young man the flat side of his sword and knocked him off his horse into the middle of the field. Cristobel couldn't believe her eyes. She's just got her son back. And now here he is, killed in some stupid joust they didn't even need to have in the first place. She ran down to the edge of the field, but stopped when she saw the victorious knight reach down his hand to lift the young man to his feet. The two knights raised their helmets to salute the stands. And she saw his face. And he saw hers. And not even the minstrels, with all their stories, had words beautiful enough to describe the reunion of those two hearts. Well, when the two kings in charge of all this heard the whole story, and I don't mind telling you, it took quite a while to get it all straight, they set about making things right at once, and within the hour, Eglamore and Cristobel were married in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of anyone who cared to see. There was only one person unhappy amid all this celebration: the king of Ongberg. When Eglamore and Cristobel thanked him for raising their son, he said, "Yes, but now you will take him from me, and I will be left to grieve a lost child as you grieved when he was taken from you." After much careful discussion, it was agreed that Cristobel, the lost beautiful child, would return to Ongberg, where he had lived all his life, where he was truly son and heir, and where he could marry whoever he wished in his own good time. Eglamore invited any of the knights who wanted to join him to come with him back to Arsden, and many of them did join in, and away they all went, Eglamore, Cristobel, and a great crowd of knights, back across that gray-green sea, back to the inheritance that was theirs, back to that place where Count Prindel still ruled, now a bitter old man. He spent his days devising laws meant only to add misery to the lives of his subjects. His dungeons were full of those who displeased him, and he kept his executioners busy. But while life in Arsden had only gotten worse and worse in all that time, one thing had not changed. Count Prindel still spent most of his time up in that tower, staring out those long, thin windows the size of a man. And one day from up in that tower, he saw a great crowd of knights approaching from the sea. He stepped out onto the ledge to try to make out the marks on their shields. Were these friends or enemies? He couldn't tell. He turned back inside to sound the alarm, but his foot slipped on the ledge, still wet from last night's rain. He flailed his arms as he tumbled backwards, and if anyone had been watching, it would have looked like he was trying to fly, arms outstretched like a great black bird, swooping silently down from heaven to earth. But no one was watching. No one heard the thump as he hit the ground. No one heard the crack as his neck snapped. No one noticed he was gone for 2 days, until that great crowd of knights arrived at the castle, and Eglamore and Cristobel went looking for him. And when they found his body in the shadow of the tower, no one mourned. Eglamore and Cristobel ruled in Arsden wisely and well for many years, but the very first thing they did when they became Lord and Lady of that place was this: stone by stone, they dismantled that tower. And with those gray stones, they built a chapel with windows of red and yellow and blue and green, windows that turned God's golden sunshine into jeweled light. And it's in that chapel that many years later, Eglamore and Cristobel were both laid to their rest in one tomb, topped with two stone figures, a knight and a lady, their shoulders touching, their arms touching, the hem of her stone skirt overlapping the edge of his stone tunic, never to be separated, not even by death, never again to be parted from each other's love. And I don't care what the minstrels would say, that is a love story.
I didn't think that a story with a giant and a dragon would leave me in tears, but you hold out and you get it. So it doesn't matter if it's a story about cornbread or Cajun dancing or what it is. When you hear Dolores Hydock tell a story, you leave just feeling a whole lot more full than when you came. So thank you so much, Miss Dolores, always.
Thank you, thank you.
As y'all know, Miss Dolores is usually our wrap-up program. She's usually the last program in the series, but we had to make a little adjustment. Dr. Jim Hansen will be with us next week, and you don't want to miss next week either. He's going to do a pretty unique story about the Lindberghs, and it will have a little bit of a theatrical dramatization with it, so you really don't want to miss him because he's amazing. And I do want to say before we leave again, thank you to Mr. Chris Kramer with First Bank of Alabama. He's the fantastic cookie boy. And to Miss Jane Henderson. Miss Jane is our normal cookie girl, and she's back with us today. So thank you, Miss Jane, for being here. And I want to thank you all for coming out on a somewhat dreary day. We really appreciate the great crowd, and we will see you next week. Thank you.